Hi, I'm Grace Dawes. I'm the editor of Movement, and we're here at Move America 2024. We've just kicked off day 2, and I'm joined by Jason Gillespie, Senior Director and Head of Continuous Improvement and Innovation for Transportation from DHL Supply Chain. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jason. How's your Move experience been so far?
It's been great, yeah. I've had a talk to a lot of people, seen a lot of great presenters, and the content's been fantastic, so I always learn something new at these events, yeah.
Great, I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a bit about your role at DHL?
Yeah, so I always tell people my day job is continuous improvement, right? Making sure things work better, we're more efficient, but the big part of it is the innovation side, and that's what brings me here, right? So it's hard to continuously improve with all the new technology and capabilities that are out there and not always looking at what we can bring in, right? So things like autonomous vehicles, digitalization, AI, and all of that. So those are big focus areas for me and important to the company as well, that we make sure that we're always thought leaders as well as adapting and experimenting with these new technologies.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a long job title. You've got a lot.
I know, it's
a lot to cover.
It's a lot to do. Thankfully, I focus on transportation and not all of the warehouses, which is a whole other group. Right? So we have a lot. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you, what are the most important considerations that some companies need to consider when launching an autonomous pilot? I know you talked a lot about that in your panel yesterday, but what do they also need to evaluate as part of the process, and why?
I mean, you could talk a lot about the partner itself. There are a lot of great startups out there with really fascinating technology. But when you're talking about a Class 8 vehicle, it's a unique animal, right? So the big trucks, right?
Yeah.
Pulling the trailers down the road, they have a higher level of safety regulations. There's a lot more redundancy, or I'd say it's the same redundancy, but it's more important and heavier and bigger in those trucks, right? So working with an OEM who has that approach is something that we believe strongly in, so that we're not, always working with a modified truck, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So instead of the modified truck, you work with companies that are kind of building it with that autonomous vision in mind, and then it's more fit for purpose. So that's one element. We have experimented, like I said, worked with partners who are no longer in business, right? So we did try and work with them, and it didn't work out, and we moved on.
Yeah.
So we've learned from that. And then I'd say, just real quick on the operation itself, it's not easy right now everything's got to kind of pilot within Texas.
Yeah.
So that's a restriction. Thankfully, Texas is a big state, and we have a lot of freight here, but it is a limitation on being able to truly autonomous test.
Yeah.
Right. So if I want to go from Phoenix to Atlanta, I have to do stops in Texas to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, one thing I learned from your panel yesterday actually is, embracing new technologies such as autonomous vehicles. It's so big and it's so scary, and a lot of people won't really embrace them, and piloting is the best way to introduce them and just nudge them little by little, I think is what someone said in your panel yesterday. So piloting is actually very important, and that's something I've actually learned from your panel yesterday. I also wanted to ask you, what are the most common challenges associated with piloting this kind of technology, and how can companies anticipate and overcome those challenges?
Well, and I think this is where DHL has an advantage. And I mean, just to say for a minute, we have enough freight density with multiple customers. No one customer or shipper, I should say, if you are shipping freight, the odds of you having freight that goes bi-directional in a lane is very low.
Yeah.
So we can help with things like that, because if you can't keep the trucks moving and full, you don't really have a business case, right? So it's having that business case, I'd say, is the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
We don't want to pilot for the sake of piloting.
Yeah.
We want to have something that we can scale practically and operate our business on, and kind of create an autonomous network. And right now that's all going to be in the South. Like I mentioned, there's a geographic restriction here for a lot of reasons. But having that is a big lesson learned for us and a challenge. I'd say the technology is one of my least concerns right now. I mean, I think, and I've talked to a lot of the providers here that are working on those edge cases, as they call it, so the new situations that they find the truck in, and you don't want the truck to just stop in the middle of the highway, right?
Yeah.
So you want to have faith that the technology will adapt to those new challenges, and that they will have a remote in to say, okay, I'm going to take over now because this happened. But the safety drivers are huge right now. We've got safety drivers on all of the vehicles, just hands off, right?
Yeah.
So they're driving autonomously, but it doesn't look like they are, right? So that's been big for the pilot as well, to get adoption and lessons learned and everything.
Yeah, amazing. I did hear once actually someone say, you know, you've reached autonomy when you build cars not around the driver, but just around the passenger.
Yeah.
And so eventually, hopefully, cars won't be based with the driver in mind.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And or for the trucks specifically, maybe
Yeah.
there's a takeover point
Yeah.
where it gets to a yard and we don't yet want the autonomous driver to do the docking and the yard
Yeah.
moving and everything like that.
Yeah.
So the human driver can hop in and take over from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, hopefully, there won't even be the wheel. It will just be the the car.
That'd be pretty sci-fi at this point, but yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can get there.
We're getting there, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining
Yeah.
me today, Jason. It's been lovely meeting you, and I hope you enjoy
Thank
the
you.
rest of your time here
All right,
at Move
good to
America.
meet you. Thank you for having me.